And welcome back. It's time to take your seats. Earlier we spoke about change, and now the question is what next? What comes after change? Where are we in the process of transformation of Polish film and theater schools? So now I want to welcome the rector Milenia Fiedler of the Łódź Film School and Monika Żelazowska, who is the rector's anti-bullying and discrimination officer. Agnieszka Rychlewska from the National Academy of Theatre Arts in Wrocław couldn't join us. Tomasz Wysocki from Kraków is in the house. And we also have the ethics officer at the National Academy of Theatre Arts in Kraków. Our host and moderator is Agata Adamicka-Sitek, the student's ombudsperson, and Wojciech Malajkat, the rector of the Warsaw Theatre Academy. And this meeting will be moderated by Piotr Jacoń, who needs no introduction in Poland. For the benefit of those of you who don't know him, he's a journalist and an anchorman at TVN24. He runs workshops and a series on and he was also given the Equality Crown by the Anti-Homophobia Campaign and the Freedom of Speech Medal. So now it's over to our moderator. Good afternoon, and it so happens that I'm in the middle of the stage, but actually you're the people in the center here. This is all about you. I would like to begin by saying something important. Those of you listening in to our discussion, that we do have time set aside for questions and comments. And I wanted to begin with imagine this, picture this. If I were to stand before you as a young student, a first-year student, junior, or if one of my daughters were to be here as a junior, could you look us in the eye and promise that you'll be safe in this school and your dignity will always be respected, will always respect your dignity? Question directed to our host, the rector. Okay, that was meaningful, that was significant. Now let's... No, I couldn't guarantee that. I couldn't promise you that you would be entirely safe. What I could say is that our school does have a procedure. If something happens that violates or infringes your dignity, that things will happen, and there are procedures. I could say that we're doing a lot to understand what's going on. That's what the previous panel was about. We're doing a lot to name things that we haven't defined, and if something doesn't have a name, if something's kind of a default setting of the system, then it'll never change. So the first step will always be to give things a name, and that's what we're doing. It's a process. We know a lot. We've learned a lot on what should be changed. We know how to change it. We know increasingly how to change it. We've had a number of important series of workshops, some of which were very difficult. These were workshops that led to profound clashes or confrontation lesson on preventing emotional abuse. Why was that difficult? They were difficult because it was the first time we addressed these things in a serious way in this community. So who were the participants of these workshops? The participants were open to all faculty. Was it mandatory? It was mandatory, yes, it was obligatory. This was a two-day workshop, 16 hours in small groups of about 10 people. And it demanded a lot of commitment. It required a lot of commitment from the participants. It wasn't something that you could just sit in the back row and not take part in. So it wasn't a class you could blow off. But I didn't say, but I can't say that we can guarantee your safety. If the rector would care to reply. No, it was significant that I handed it over to the student's ombudsperson, because that's how I understand what's going on in this school today. It's a very strong, powerful voice, and that's the way it's supposed to be. The ombudsperson is supposed to make themselves heard. Our school and every school is like a conveyor belt. We have people coming in to study, they graduate, the faculty stays, the administration or the employees, the staff, stay. Since this is an arts school, it's about a one-to-one model of tutoring, and that's the way we want it to be. So it's all about who's teaching and who's learning. And we want to attract, we want to get people who are individualists. We want a discussion. We want a conversation. We want teachers and students. I mean, we realize that the discussion won't be easy, that it won't be an easy exchange. What the ombudsperson said about the master-disciple relationship, the model, where teachers are always right, they know best, and they tell you what to do. They lead the way, they know what's best without taking into account the sensibility, the imagination of the student. So that's why I can't say that it's an entirely safe space, just as you can't call anywhere a safe space in the world today. That would be utopian. And as the ombudsperson said, we're doing everything to provide a systemic safeguards for faculty and students, to provide instruments and tools that would help make it as safe a space as possible, a place where that guarantees or that ensures, that safeguards the dignity. We had a number of workshops, several workshops, and these workshops give teachers instruments. No one ever taught us how to teach artists. We were taught in elementary schools, in nursery schools, secondary schools. We were taught by the system, a system based on prescription, prescriptive and infallible system. We want art schools to give people the right to make mistakes, because we learn from mistakes. Okay, this powerlessness, I suppose, on both sides of the process that you've admitted to. So there is this master-disciple relationship. It's something that we've been taught at home. It's something that we've been infused with. So looking at all sorts of pathological phenomena in systems, it's like a looking glass. And my question might sound a little naive. It's intended to provoke you. So, okay, I did provoke you to reply. But if I went to the Łódź Film School, then what would I here? What would they tell me? Is that a specific question? So would I be safe and would my dignity be respected? I can't guarantee that, but once I can't guarantee, okay, that you'll be, I can't guarantee that you'll be safe and nothing bad will happen to you, but I can, however, say, what I can do is guarantee that the community, that you won't be left alone. And speaking on behalf of the community, I can say that we'll try. And by community, I mean all of us. I also mean students. I also mean people who are the most vulnerable or seem to be vulnerable. I want to say that it's impossible. Okay, a concept like dignity or freedom, these aren't values that are given once and for all. They aren't enshrined, written in stone, carved in stone. These are values that we uphold every day, every decision we make. And if we want everyone in our community to feel safe, then everybody has the obligation to take risks and to make the effort to change things that are unacceptable. More broadly, of course, management, faculty, those in the hierarchy who are in a position of authority or decision makers, so they have greater responsibility, but that's not enough if there's no active contribution and also risk-taking on the part of everybody involved. So I would say that, like I said, I can't guarantee to any young person enrolling that they'll be safe, entirely safe. But what I can promise is that I'll try to support them should anything happen, should their safety be in any way at risk, or if they want to stand up for somebody's well-being and dignity. Yes, I wanted to thank you for having me here. I want to thank you for the work you've done. The report is indeed very impressive. Obviously, we all know that it's impossible to guarantee total security, but there's zero tolerance and there's zero acceptance of crossing boundaries. And I can say this because the rector is fearless, and if necessary, she will terminate people's contracts. There were people who were dismissed, and we won't hesitate. We'll do everything it takes, everything possible, but it's not simple by any means, and it's also difficult for whistleblowers, for people who step forward, for me, who has to tell them that there will be confrontation, so it's not easy, but like I said, there's no tolerance. And this is like being in the center. Okay, if I'm doing an audition for the safest school, I'm looking at you, Kraków, working for several years on codes of conduct, rules and regulations, and ombudspersons. We've done that since 2019 at our school, and I'm passing from theory to practice, and I can say that a lot has happened. And when there's a lot of practice and experience, what I can do is guarantee that we'll be present. It's never binary, it's never clear-cut. Things are difficult. Some people quit of their own accord. Some teachers, even with 40 years experience, will quit because they don't accept the change, the new way, so they don't fit in, they don't see themselves in an open and inclusive environment. They can't find ways, they can't come up with a way of teaching. That's happened. There's the assessment of teachers at the Krakow Academy has changed by student assessment, and this is guided, this is by students, this is run by students. It happens that after the procedure is completed, after the procedure, the evaluation, there have been teachers who've been dismissed based on student evaluations. It also happens, it happened, I mean, it's never clear-cut, because as you said, we teach artists, we're dealing with artists, free spirits who follow different rules, who to whom different standards kind of apply than would apply to students in other courses, other fields. So there are codes of conduct and rules. Sometimes there are people who can play off the advantage or the leverage they have. They can play, is that good or bad? Or do we not know yet? We don't know yet. Talking about processes, something we're following. This profound change means that some exploitation or playing the system, for instance, false accusations of teachers by students or vice versa, that can happen. Because the procedure as provided for in the Code of Conduct and the rules, it applies to students and teachers alike, so both can feel vulnerable, both can be placed in an uncomfortable position. So again, presence is important here, tangible, real presence, something that's not written down, because theater can't be brought down to the letter of the law. So you just need to be close, you need to be attuned to what's going on. Okay, thanks for this first round of answers. Thanks for not providing or guaranteeing anything, and I'm glad that it went the way it did, because if any of you had said that you can guarantee safety, then that would be a red light, a red flag, because I think that this conviction, this certainty that everything's okay led to a lot of abuse, and now that we're feeling less confident, less sure of ourselves, this allows us to redefine the relation between ourselves. What we said about inability to provide a guarantee doesn't mean that we can't guarantee anything. But like I said, the world doesn't guarantee anything. That's life. And what I'm hearing from, much to my I'm hearing that all of us try to be present, try to be with the participants of the process, and once we have a system set up, all will be together in the schools. So now I want to imagine, let's have another scene. Let's picture this. I'm an acclaimed theater director, actor, celebrity. I'm a guest lecturer at one of your schools. I run master classes. So at my convenience, and here I am in front of you, and given the changes, with the changes you're introducing, can you guarantee artistic freedom, creative freedom? I think to the same extent that just as we can't guarantee everyone, just as we can't guarantee absolute. Okay, I think we're on the same page. I think that we can't promise anyone, promise an A-lister, a celebrity demigod, because I don't know how they understand guarantees. Because if they expect, okay, let me rephrase that. Okay, did you ever have conversations like that? Did you have expectations? I mean, people not even being explicit, but not. Okay, we do hire theater directors to direct diploma pieces, but we also have full-time teachers who are eminent, acclaimed artists, and now they also need to reconsider, they need to give some thought whether they can fit in, whether they see themselves involved in this new environment, circumstances. At the academy here, we haven't had anybody not being able to conceive, not refusing to compromise. We haven't had anybody so intransigent that they gave up and quit. Because, but anyway, so even if there was one or two evaluations that didn't go right, we weren't forced to dismiss anyone because maybe because you started the process earlier. Okay, it's not a witch hunt. It was never a witch hunt. We never saw it as such. I don't think that any of the schools do so. It's not about hunting someone down and smoking them out or what have you. It's about a new quality, a new way, a new approach. What we need is to talk about freedom. Let's talk about freedom, how we understand the concept. But that's where we are at the moment. We're asking ourselves questions that we haven't asked ourselves before. Previously, freedom was everything that the master needed to create. And we never asked questions. Today we'd ask, and even we'd expect such a person to talk to the students first and ask and sign some sort of contract, an agreement regarding the process, a chance to ask questions on the methodology, on how we'll be working. So it's a freedom that needs to be defined in advance. Some things will come out in the process. Of course, it's very complex. It's a dynamic process, but we will sit down and define the basic concepts, try and figure out where we are, informed consent on whether the conditions, the freedom, the framework is acceptable or not. And if not, then how can we redefine it? And in our school, at our academy, we're working with a contract, something that ought to be written down, but that's also open-ended, that can be revised, because only so we know where we are, some things will need to be revised, amended, revisited. And so first of all, we know that it needs to start with a conversation, and we also have tools, methods, approaches that we learned. They're as relevant in school as they are in a theater, so we need to begin by defining what we mean by freedom.
Okay, so maybe we can go to Krakow in that case. I've been listening very carefully, and my answer goes in a different vein, but probably because I'm less from the theater world. And perhaps the question sounds a bit different to myself. Artistic freedom, yes. Definitely nobody is going to censor you, or you're an artist, look for the proper form and so on. That's a value that we all respect and that we ensure at the school. But if creative freedom is to be understood in this context, yes, as somebody being violent or exploiting others, that's to me, that has nothing to do with the definition of artistic freedom. Working in theater or in film, that's a collective effort. The master, or what you will, the director, the leader, whoever is leading the work, or the lecturer, the teacher during class, the person who is in charge is working with a team. With a team and not by means of a team. The people working with him or her are not just a material to be molded at will. So I have to admit, I've been following carefully, and it would never have occurred to me to ask somebody to make sure that that they're not about to exploit or abuse somebody for the sake of the work. Especially after all the experiences we've had, especially your experience at the film school. What you're saying is kind of obvious, but we're working with a team and not molding a team or using them as a thing. However, for generations, it was done the other way around. Yes, indeed. There was an ethos which still continues to be relevant for some people, and I understand that's a powerful thing. But for me, there's no discussion. It's a zero-sum game. There's no artistic consideration that would justify abusing people or violating people's rights, causing people to feel ill at ease. We don't do this simply, especially not at the film school. No artistic considerations ever justify transgressions, especially at school, where we have responsibility to our students because they are only entering this world and they deserve protection. So I wouldn't look at this in terms of artistic freedom. So we have a zero-sum in Łódź. Let's go back to Krakow for a second and then we'll continue. I'll keep holding the mic. I absolutely agree. However, from my observations, our observations, there's a distinction. A theater school is a place where students need to do some things to get a diploma. We actors with 30 years under our belt have the right to get up and leave. However, students know that they have to graduate. Everybody has a different type of sensitivity. Everybody has different levels of resilience. So I think that artistic freedom, when going for an acting diploma, everybody who undertakes this challenge needs to be aware, and maybe what I'll say is controversial. You need to put your sensitivity aside and have the awareness that when working towards an acting diploma, these people need to demonstrate their potential. After all, they're about to enter the market. We need to chisel them out, so to speak, get them to be at their best. And it's not a simple matter. Right now we're talking about theater academies, but the whole industry is a bit behind, a bit backward. There's a lot of inertia. The theater community isn't really embracing these changes. a fast way. I think it's very good that shaping young actors, directors, and so on starts with theater schools. Those who are about to enter the world of theater or the film industry or any other branch of art. We need to be aware that we have to maintain their boundaries, respect their boundaries. My freedom ends where somebody else's freedom begins. We would like the world to be ideal, at least I would like the world to be ideal. I'm an idealist. But on the other hand, being in this process, and yourselves probably as well, you've probably heard concerns. I'm asking this question because you mentioned what happens to people after they graduate, how this industry is still operating. Also, among your students at the Theatre Academy, as the report shows, there is a concern that this upgraded, inclusive school that we all want, that it may be insufficient preparation for the acting profession, so the things that happen after you graduate and when you enter the quote-unquote old world governed by old relationships, the old way of doing things, the old mentality, which can be boiled down to, if you don't get your ass kicked, you won't succeed. So what do you say to that? We're coming back to the point of departure. I've had over a dozen such conversations at the school when faculty with many years behind them came to me and said, if we don't break them, if we don't kick their ass, they won't be able to deal with the acting profession. They won't make it. So if we agree that the school should submit on this point, and that it should submit to this mentality, then we'll simply go back to where we used to be. As a matter of fact, all the things we're doing, the new things we're doing is to give these people armor, to give them tools, to give them weapons, to arm them for the future. And as we've been saying, I think that our students will bring about a huge wave of change across the industry. Film is undergoing its own process of change quite violently, and I don't think it's possible anymore in film for anyone to harm people or sacrifice them on the altar of art. At the same time, we've been speaking loud and clearly that violations, transgressions are not allowed in art. This is not a reversible process. I would like to quote my experiences because I've had a lot of talks. I've written a lot of emails with graduates. And this notion of the teacher who tells them it's for your own good, it's to make you strong, it's to make you powerful. They used to always, they've told me I was never treated as badly later on as at school. It never happened. So the outer world, which is depicted as cruel, actually proved to be more gentle than a class. It's wonderfully put in the report, this market paternalism, this mechanism which amplifies this way of pushing students for their own good. It's a kind of illusion. And I think it has always existed. Indeed, I've heard from many people who are in very high positions in art that they never experienced violence on such a scale and difficulties on such a scale as those they experienced at schools. So this myth, it's a myth. And these mechanisms actually set the stage for abuses. If we're doing everything for students' good, that's a terrible manipulative mechanism which we've defined in the report and during our workshops. We analyzed it. and we learned to defuse those mechanisms. But both school and theater are interconnected vessels, and they condition one another, and they change one another. For example, I work at the Teatr Dramatyczny in Warsaw, the dramatic theater, which has been introducing all the tools that we've been introducing at the school. Contracting, the process, an in-depth evaluation of the creative process run by qualified professionals. It doesn't end with the premiere and then we all forget or go to therapy. It's obvious that after a while, at the end, we all sit down and have a very deep and serious conversation about what happened. We work based on contracts. We have the support of an intimacy coordinator. I'm actually quite lucky to be in both places at the same time, and I am introducing those tools. There are theaters across Poland, and they are a growing number, which understand these needs and this awareness. So I think this movement is really happening. The world will get you argument is totally out of date. I didn't initially intend to ask this question. Are you somehow connected to the Grotowski Institute? No, but let me call out Grotowski, because I was actually thinking for this discussion about the here and now to be backed up by something. We should look at the history of theater in the same way. We should actually revisit and retell it in a new way, create a new narrative in order to face the truth, in order to be true to ourselves. Looking at John Paul II, we're starting to look at John Paul II in a new light. Maybe we should look at Grotowski and other icons as well in a new light. I need to respond. Many years ago, I embarked on a critique, a feminist and queer critique of Grotowski many years ago, and I wrote the first critical text called The Performer's Sex, along with Weronika Szczawińska, and this opened up a whole new perspective. But tomorrow, during our joint panel, we'll be talking about Grotowski, and we will be talking about him as the creator of a highly systematic reflection on themes whom we can look to today. So actually we call for returning to the writings of Grotowski, but it needs to be a dialectic between a very powerful critical thought and the things we can take away from Grotowski, because the way he writes about the actor's body or the life body, the memory body. These are amazing tropes around which we can weave a very inclusive and very sensitive practice, or indeed a policy of corporeity. So that's how I imagine our work, and that's my response to so-called cancel culture. It's not that we have to throw these things into the rubbish bin. We can take a lot away from them, but we need to maintain a critical awareness, and I think that's the task at hand. So I'd like to applaud you for saying that. Thank you for so much emotion. It's not that I want to get rid of the John Paul II or Grotowski. I don't want to throw them off the pedestal. I'm simply saying we need to be able to discuss them, to question certain myths. So we talked about students on students versus staff. So now I'd like us to turn to the moment when these changes are occurring. The Warsaw Academy is on a longer path, but we've got the Łódź Film School, we've got the Krakow School. I'd like to ask you about the moment when all the red lights started flashing, the first reports of violence come up, the first call-outs happen. What was it like? To what extent was it really a break of trust on both sides? A paralyzing moment, not just the breakdown of trust between a specific victim and a specific abuser, but more generally among the community. I was at that program council meeting where that letter was read out, and personally I was shaken up. I was unaware. I never thought things were that bad. Anna Paliga's letter. So at first I was in denial. I wasn't hearing it. Thankfully we had a committee. We had appointed it a year earlier. After the Civil Rights Ombudsman asked our school, we got a letter from him, and he was asking whether we have a body of that kind. So we established such a body, and we set to work immediately. Things were very difficult. It was dramatic, but Anna met with us. And this was followed by an avalanche. Anna was really the little stone that broke the dam. And then we started getting more and more letters from graduates. We even had to segregate them. Statutes of limitation, under investigation for the ombudsman, and so on. It was difficult, but we were really motivated to rebuild the trust. We didn't want to sweep anything under the rug. There were a lot of expectations, appoint an external commission. You can't handle it yourselves. We've had a lot of feedback from students and graduates. We simply realized that we needed to deal with the issue, and if nobody else does, if we don't do it, nobody else will. No wise consultant. We need to go through this. If I could give you a hint, I'm thinking of the specific solutions you introduced, what measures you introduced, not just investigating specific cases, which is what the Commission did, but really taking the whole school community into your care. When I spoke of the breakdown of trust, that was a generalized phenomenon. Yes, just for clarity's sake, all the procedures or documents, the code of ethics, the commission procedures, informing, reacting, had been implemented in 2019, a year before. However, there had been no complaints filed officially. And Mrs. Paliga, who was by then a graduate of the school, it was her complaint that started the whole process. As for specific complaints, we applied the procedure, and there were explanatory proceedings, confirmation, and so on. But in parallel, yes, indeed, it was a huge shock to the system, especially as the film school are 8 different specializations, and cases of violence, discrimination, problems really applied to 98% of the submissions. Only we're in 2 specializations. It was a huge shock, a surprise for the students and the staff. because they hadn't seen such things within their immediate circle or in the other faculties. What's happening in parallel were meetings with the whole community, with the students, and with groups, with staff separately, and separately with students, just to get the conversation going, and also to share the emotions and all the doubts regarding what was happening. It was an extremely difficult moment, really a breakdown, an earthquake, a brutal eye-opener. We thought things were good, and it turned out to be otherwise. That things were happening that nobody had really detected. But thanks to the situation, on the one hand, you had these complaints from people who felt they had been violated by their teachers. But on the other hand, there was a list of support. In your 2021 report, there's a statistic which says that 70 people signed a letter in support of the teaching staff. And I'm saying that in order to show that although we are currently at a point when it's obvious for us that here we are hunting down bad practices. But when you were in the process of diagnosing the problem, there were different indications, different signals. Those from the victims and those who said that there is no problem. What do you mean? Yes, absolutely. These are not unequivocal situations. Maybe the most bizarre, that's the wrong word, the most illustrative example of how these situations were unequivocal was when one group of students files a complaint against a teacher. Some of the students, at the same time, this is filed with the dean. We get similar statements from others, or others say that they appreciate this lecture, and some students signed both of these letters, the complaint and the praise. So it doesn't mean that the problem doesn't exist. It's just that finding a solution to the problem is more complicated. And because it was also in the media, we were under a lot of pressure from the media. Hello, yes, that's us. Because the media are interested in clickbites. So scandals, extreme things, whom we had to take down, who had done what, how quickly you're reacting, the expectation that we are to react at lightning speed. Yes, the reaction has to be instant, but we can't solve the problem instantly. There is no instant solution to these problems because instant solutions are ethically and morally wrong.
I should have spoken not so much about speed, but about intensity and thoroughness. What I wanted to say in reference to the comments and the evaluations, I've noticed a difference in generations. So for what had been acceptable for graduates, so what they considered acceptable because the teacher was outstanding, eminent, and had given them a lot, for a student today, that would be entirely unacceptable. So I see a sea change, a generational shift in terms of the needs and expectations of students. Also, how much we can give up, because these were students willing to sacrifice a lot. They said, we want to work with this lecturer because they'll put on a good show, a show that will get prizes. and awards, and sometimes we needed to say no, because even though the artistic effect would have been good, we won't subject you to that, even if the students had asked for it, had asked to work with a specific person, so it's never clear-cut. And this conversation is also difficult because we're not speaking about names, we're not naming names, but if we were to drop names, then we'd see the nature of the challenge. A student who has to deal with an A-lister, a big name, and that they have to contend with, but then trying to make this relationship healthy. So in Krakow, was there a chilling effect? Did you encounter something similar? Listening, I was thinking about my kids who are all grown up now. And briefly, let me just talk about my experience. Okay, my kids grew up in theaters and dressing rooms and so on. And when they were growing up, when they stopped smiling, stopped laughing at stories on my education, stories from what it was like back in the day when we were students, then I realized that the times they were a-changing. And for me, that was when I understood that it's time we started thinking differently and factor in the experience of my children's generation. A cold shower came with what you mentioned for all of us when all of a sudden we started seeing clearly the things that were going on. After 30 years of experience, when I think back to my student days, we were treated in an indirectly abusive way, so trying to move away from that, trying to adopt a new attitude, a new mindset. That's a process. That's not something that you can do overnight. It's not something that you can change just like that. We can come to our senses, but then we have to start groping around or kind of trying to figure it out. As a teacher, I have this, when I'm teaching second, third-year students, when I'm teaching these kids etudes, I know that each of them has a different boundary, that their lines are in different places. We need to realize that nobody's the same. So overall blanket codes, I'm not sure that's the way to go. Okay, we can get back to that. To what extent you're speaking one language, kind of, as schools of performance, but you have different ways, different ideas on how to codify this, how to look for guarantees. Tomasz, you mentioned a personal experience. You mentioned something following on what you said about the abusive nature of the school you studied at in your student days, I found your bio at on the theater website. I'll just read it here. Tomasz Wysocki, theater won out with maritime school and journalism. My aunts and uncles were smiling. My buddies laughed at me, but it overcame my laziness and neglect. When my father was dying, I was on stage. When my kids were being born, I was on stage. I acted with a broken leg. I acted with a broken heart. I continue acting For 25 years, it was worth it. It still is. So that's very nice, really. I mean, it's great. It's really very touching. It's a wonderful description. But when I read this personal statement, I have to say what I thought was, this is the victim. This was written by someone who's the victim of an abusive environment. Okay, I mean, sorry. It's not a personal. It's not personal, but I'm talking about the system that you all grew up in. This conviction, and you can also, okay, that art requires sacrifice. Art demands sacrifice. I'm sure that's something you've all heard. And in this personal statement, this rings out very clearly. I'm not sure if this is a time for any personal confessions, but I wonder what led you to conclude that my statement was the product of a very abusive environment. I grew up in a difficult environment, so the decision to attend drama school kept me off the street, because most of my friends overdosed or drank themselves to death. So I'm happy to be in the theater. When I'm thinking of myself as a young man, it's not just a theater school. So theater school, which was abusive, but it was a paradise compared to the hood I grew up in. Of course, to the estate I was raised on. So every school is different. My peers, my colleagues, my classmates, but even the most abusive teachers taught us a hell of a lot, really. I'm serious here. And it's not breaking characters. It's not about forcing us to get up off our knees, but their practice, their knowledge. So we were able to sift, to separate what they taught from the way they taught, because they did know, and they had so much to give. But now we don't make that distinction, because even if somebody knows everything, that doesn't give them the right to walk all over me. But back then, we were able to make that distinction and to have this double think. Okay, but I mean, sorry for, again, using you here. Or referring to your personal experience, but emotions are something that comes up naturally when talking about these things. However, again, this is a very colloquial category that I want to introduce here. So at some point, did you have this moral hangover? Did you have a guilt trip? I mean, did you feel that you were like complicit? You were complicit, you acquiesced to it. To this abusive environment. Or maybe you realized something's too late. Yes. When this conversation began in the academies and schools, I got a letter from a former student of mine where I read that classes with me were the most difficult part of his experience as a student. And I still can't say anything to justify myself, except I didn't notice even the slightest signal that there was something wrong, that person was uncomfortable. And I want to comment on what Tomasz said. So we were able to distinguish, or maybe we weren't, I couldn't. I agreed to have everything. I accepted everything they did to me, my teachers. Fortunately, they didn't do a lot of bad things, because when my mother died, I wasn't on stage. I went to the funeral. I went to say goodbye to her. So it's not about personal experience. I don't think I can agree. I can't. That it's up to the students to decide whether they want to make this distinction that they need. We're not allowed to do that. We can't do that. We need to be vigilant. We need to be alert. We need to be sensitive. We need to be responsive. And we need to identify every feeling of discomfort, but it doesn't have to be that difficult. What we're doing now, by giving students, by telling students clearly to notify us of anything, and everything will be discussed, everything is can be negotiated, we'll have contracts and agreements. This is why we spoke about this, about not being to guarantee anything. Students will also be more, have more courage. Students will be encouraged to let us know, to stop and pause, at least to just a moment's pause gives us the space to grow, to keep working, just a breather, take a breather. Okay, thank you for that. Thanks for getting back to the letter that you mentioned. Yeah, okay, let's be frank here. Let's not have a conversation about it being so clear-cut. But what did you feel? What did that letter change? Okay, so now you're trying to recall what it was like working with that student, what you could have done, but then you see all your students and you're thinking maybe these were people who didn't write that letter. So you need to start questioning yourself, maybe other people. Yes, well, humility is always a good idea. It's always worth questioning yourself, and that pays off. It's worth it. This is a letter I've been bringing up at various occasions. It's no secret. So I think that if anybody wanted to write another letter, they would. No, but I'm saying that, okay, even if I assured you that if I'm talking about this letter, it's keeping me up at night. No, it's not, okay, this is something that's stayed with me, and the bad thing was that I didn't notice it at the time. I didn't notice that this person was somehow feeling uncomfortable, and I think I have to end it there. Okay, right, and thank you. Moral hangovers, guilt. Now it's over to Łódź. Yes, I'm ashamed. Hello, my name is, and I'm ashamed of myself. No, I am ashamed. I'm ashamed that I didn't know. I mean, you can ask, how come you didn't know? I wasn't aware that the acting department, actually, there was one thing. I didn't notice the details. That's the thing. There was a time when students didn't want to hand in their evaluation forms to their teachers. They brought them to the office. And that should have given me food for thought, that they didn't want to hand in their evaluation forms to their actual teacher. I'm also ashamed that when I saw one of these people raising their voice when talking to an employee, a staff member, I didn't stop them. I didn't step up and say, but I thought that we should look after, we shouldn't yell at students, but if you yell at a staff member, at an employee, that's okay. I'm also, my lecturers and production heads were on board with me, and so maybe this led me to turn a blind eye. Okay, it's difficult not to feel. Okay, a hangover probably is a good word here. For several months, ever since this matter came up ever since this blew up. I had a problem coming to terms because I was aware that these procedures were in place, the procedures made sense, and there was no need to change the procedures that we had. But if there were no complaints, then that meant that we don't have any problems, right? However, on the other hand, there was a certain, it's something I'm sure we've all seen. Okay, we're artists, so we can, it's all about emotions, bringing them out. You start yelling, you get expressive, not necessarily in the creative process, but you're just kind of, because that's my expression, I'm an artist, so this is the way I treat people, this is the way, it's who I am, right? And I think that all of us each and every one of us ought to think, okay, what the limits of what is tolerated are changing. We're seeing, we've heard them saying enough. Enough is enough. The standard, the norm, is no longer acceptable, and just because the feeling that something's wrong was with us for a while. I'm speaking for my school, and I'm speaking referring to my experience. So we needed a shock to the system to actually do anything because it was being diluted, watered down. Okay, this is somewhat personally. I remember advising a student who came up to me all shook up saying, "Don't worry, that guy, that's the way he is, it's his style, it's his vibe, it's not personal." What do you mean it's not personal? This attempt at normalizing and rationalizing what was going on instead of responding, reacting. And I think all of us were in some way complicit. If all of us, then maybe to give justice to the complexity of the situation, and this is also pointed out in your report, because it shows the diversity, how non-homogeneous the group of students is. So it's not that every student has the same attitude to these manifestations of abuse or boundary overstepping, and that everybody is happy with the way it's addressed. I've noted down 2 words that I think best express or show why it's not homogeneous. So you have the word solidarity and you have the word rivalry. So there's no solidarity in the group sometimes, or it's lacking, because it's a group that's geared to be competitive. Because, that's brought out in the report, the extent to which it's an important element, part of the puzzle. Yeah, I think that what is very important, and this is a basic question about the value system we live in, about how we see the world, not just art, but and when thinking about art, we often see it in market terms, in neoliberal terms, and this competition, rivalry, self-centeredness is so important, and looking out for number one. And in school, this is not something that we've dealt with. We don't have an answer. The report shows that students are often embroiled in, entangled in this ambivalence. It's a very systemic, very profound problem. These are very complex mechanisms often. One of these, this ambivalence is that, one ambivalence is that to succeed, you need cooperation. That's what theater is about, film as well, but theater is about cooperation. At the same time, students have this feeling of absolute, ruthless competition in the marketplace. And ever since they start school, they realize, when they start school, they realize that it's a 5-year-long audition. It's a casting couch with the relations they have with their teachers, with the stage directing students that can shape their careers. So being liked, being popular, it's not what happens here, it's not abuse or not abuse, but it's good to have some sort of relationship with your teacher, because, or someone who might cast you in their play or in their film, so you need to leave a good impression. Exactly. It's about, actresses being difficult. Actresses are difficult, not actors. Actors are less often perceived to be difficult. So yes, you have all these mechanisms which are very intensely present, and they they contribute to the pressure. This pressure described in the report, this pressure, this ambivalence. But it's something, but we need to realize that we're talking about basic mechanisms in culture, and which, sorry to say, this is not something that we question in culture. We're not looking for alternatives. We're an extension of the market. We're an extension of late capitalism, or maybe we're a lab, a proving ground of late capitalism. And this is a task, a challenge for all of us. I wanted to say that I don't teach practical courses. I'm not an artist. I'm a researcher. I'm a scholar of theater. I'm a scholar of culture. And we also have an important cultural studies, theater studies department, which is very much focused on research. And I think we need an alliance, which is lacking in school, because we're in silos. So we need to make this a laboratory for new social practices. Hence, new artistic practices as follows. And if we want to change it, and I think that we need to change it, we'll need to use all our potential, all our capabilities, all our to reimagine the world, to reinvent the world.
Well, of course, because it shows the scale of the problem and what you're getting into. Even this conference about drama schools and film schools is not a conference only about those schools. It's a more general conversation about the world, I guess. I apologize, that sounds trivial, but yes. Which sort of dooms you to, and maybe you'll tell me otherwise, it's very hard to have a sense of success, because if we were to only limit ourselves to what happens at the schools, then we could say, well, we've changed this and that, the procedures are working, but you know well that these people graduate, and then that's when things happen. That's when you can verify whether your procedures worked or not. I have a way of checking it. At the beginning of the conference, I said this is an unending process. It's an upward spiral. If upward is good, but it doesn't frighten me. It really sort of drives me onward, and it fascinates me. Because generally speaking, I think that's what art is for. Art is to make us aware what we need to change in the world, and so that we can do it together. And I think where we are at, well, it gives me a lot of strength because the world so desperately needs change. And I'm sorry, I have a tendency to, when I speak, it's manifestos. The world desperately needs change. I think we are so lucky that we can teach and learn and study at an institution which is part of such a process. I'm all for manifestos, but since we're talking about change in general, changing the world, that requires us to look at things in a new light, to change our outlook. So we were, our conversation has revolved around violent relations. We talked about sexual harassment, the casting couch, but discrimination happens in many different fields, in many different areas, different gestures, different flavors of discrimination. You mentioned it at the previous panel. So underrepresentation of women in the literature, in the theater literature, that's also quite a clear-cut example of discrimination. I'm also thinking of various kinds of minorities, which the report also mentions in a peculiar way. I even jotted down a quotation: the exclusion of other ethnic groups as well as disabled people exists and does exist, but we believe it is a separate category, a systemic one, so we're not going to deal with it. We're dealing with discrimination by sex, and I admit that I sort of stopped at that point, because although I understand, and of course we need to sort of delineate our study area, but it sounded a bit like discrimination of discrimination. So we deemed that there is a type of discrimination that we're not going to deal with in this report, not for the moment. And let's now focus on discrimination according to sex. So that is also a question to you. To what extent are you able to open up and go further, to have conversations about those other types of discrimination which were not in the report? So the minorities among the minorities, to what extent those people, representatives of those minorities, to what extent they have a chance to find a place for themselves to belong in your schools. I'm thinking of people with disabilities. I'm thinking of people who have gender issues, gender dysphoria. And one footnote to that point. On Saturday, I'm going to Łódź, as a matter of fact, to the new theater, Nowy Teatr, for a premiere of a play which talks about a trans man. It's a pre-war story. I had a bit of a tremor when they invited me, and why? I was asking myself, who would star as the main character? I was relieved because actually the main character is played by a trans guy. He's not a theater school student. He's a graduate of the Krakow Academy of Fine Arts. So that was one note. The second footnote will be more personal. I'm the author of a book on transsexualism, interviews with trans persons, And we're currently wrapping up work on an audiobook of my book. When my daughter learned about this audiobook, she is trans, she was happy, but she said, "But who's going to read this?" Well, I will. I've read it because I did the interviews. Who's going to record it? Who's going to record the voices of these trans people? Who's going to read the statements of these trans people in the book? The cis narrators? I don't know, I replied. Well, that's not right, Victoria said. And I'm an obedient father, so I made one condition for the storyteller recording the audiobook. I demanded that the trans parts be read by trans people. But how do we find trans narrators? They're not so easy to find. It does have a happy end. Victoria helped here as well. She wrote a post on one of her groups, a kind of ad. 37 people applied in a single day. We had a casting and we chose a trans woman and a trans man who are recording parts of that audiobook. And that's a question for you. To what extent are your schools capable of noticing diversity, every diversity, which is also representative of society, and to give these people a place here? We started with dignity, and we're ending with dignity. We had a meeting of the Theatre Academy Senate the day before yesterday. There are intense works going on the statute of the Academy. We're not yet ready. Why? I'll try to explain. We're not ready because we're not capable of imagining how this should work. Just as for a long time we were unable to conceive of the change that we're talking about today, we were afraid of it. We didn't want to talk about it for many, many years. Until finally somebody wrote a letter and we had to come to terms with the problem. So we are working to make the Academy accessible to those with disabilities, to those with of non-conforming gender identity, to make it open to people who may not speak Polish as their first language. We're not yet ready because for the moment we are afraid. Secondly, we have no money because now I speak as an official of the state. It all needs to be funded. We can't do anything without money. The ministry that oversees our academy is not ready. When we put up a rainbow flag, we were denied a subsidy. I think we've already said that both the Theatre Academy and the Film School are also places where there's a brutal clash of realities, where life clashes with expectations. And we're doing everything to go in the right direction, but I don't know how long it will take, who will pay for it. And that's where we are. If I could add, like I said at the beginning of the conference, we are fully aware that the process of change doesn't end. It's an upward spiral, and it's going to include new categories, new fields. The conversation at the Senate meeting was not easy, but it's evolving, and we are increasingly aware that, as a matter of fact, I don't think it requires any funds to admit trans or non-binary people to the school. And maybe it only requires changing the infographics on the toilet doors and some openness. Also thinking of what plays you're putting on. So we are in the process of, we are in the midst of a conversation about women, this thoughtless exploitation of the canon, which is discriminatory, how that takes away people's opportunities, women's opportunities. I think we can bring about a lot more change as long as we have the right mindset. So we are having that conversation. I just want to say this question about representation is extremely important in Polish theater, very much worth talking about, because it redefines the idea of acting as such. I don't want to get started on that topic right now, but tomorrow we'll be talking about this, amongst other things. And I hope that this conference will also bring us closer to that openness, the openness that will grow. I strongly believe that. I do know of people, photography, animation, we have such students. There have been no complaints from them. I had a situation where somebody was going by a different name. They had a different name in their application. By the time they got in, they had changed their gender and their name, and we found a way under authorship law to handle that. But I'm unaware whether there are any more problems that I haven't found out about yet. I have to admit, the example that you cited, who is going to read the trans texts for this audiobook. I don't think I'm ready. It's a question about acting, really. I'm not ready yet to have a conversation on that subject. Intuitively, I would say it's not entirely like that. I'd like to hear some arguments from the young person who thinks that it's a simple argument. It goes as follows. That these people speak with their own voice because they have a voice, and trans people have their own voice and they want to be represented. Just like, well, they're part of society, they also want to be part of that community. It's easy, it's simple. So it's about representation on the one hand. So don't play us instead of us, because we're able to play ourselves. We exist, and that's one thing. And in the case of transsexuality, there's one more argument. Habituating society to actors, cis actors playing trans people. At the end, we're left with the message, you can pretend to be a transsexual, you can play a transsexual, you can play it in the real world. That's a very violent feedback that trans people get whenever they see, say, a movie about trans people, and there's no, the cast includes no trans members. Yes, actors can act, pretend, but transsexuality should not be subject to acting. a transsexual is a person in their own right. So it's not about proving anything. It's not about proving that you can play a transsexual. Transsexuals can do it better than you. Yes, okay, I understand. I just want to say that this, my comment did not pertain to the acting faculty at our school. It was more generalized. So identification is not when recruiting students, how they identify is not taken into account at all. So in order to make the student body more representative of society, personally, myself and most of my colleagues, we don't feel the need to make special provisions. So when we recruit students, we don't apply we don't recruit the same number of men and women, for instance. We also admit non-binary, trans people, etc. They are part of the university community, no problem about it. There is one student who was a male student who was admitted as a female, and they transitioned in second year, at which point they changed their documents. So if anybody asks us to be addressed by a different name or with different pronouns, there's really no problem. We accept that. So we don't feel that there's a special problem here. I understand that it's more complicated in the case of casting. That's another issue. Who is to play a certain part? Who is allowed to play a trans person? I understand your arguments, and thank you for them. Yes, I feel I'm advocating here for one group, but actually I'm talking about a broader issue of representation of society on the stage. So I just want to add to what I said. It doesn't mean that we don't have or we're not doing anything in our power to prepare. We even have a separate track for the separate admissions path for trans people. We are doing a lot to make the academy world a diverse world, a safe world, and an accessible one. But not everything is working out as planned. Krakow.
I'm surprised, and thanks for bringing up this issue. It's not something that I expected. I'm glad we have this opportunity. Okay, the word process again comes up. And again, something that leads me to further reflection is this discussion we're having. Something that we can't address, we can't resolve all issues. The rector of the Łódź Film School said something clear, obvious. At entrance exams, we can't ask, no, don't do that, don't, honestly, don't. But often, students, this is something that the students tell us in their first year. No, not in our school. Maybe we're like, I don't know, maybe there's something about us. I take part in performances in plays with people with dwarfism, people with disabilities, a little person, sorry. So sometimes I've been asked if back in the day, somebody asked me if I was gay, because if I was, then they didn't want me. But now it's far more inclusive, and we're definitely trying at our academy. We're doing everything we can to open our doors to everyone who has what it takes, who's literally, he said, no, it's a mental shortcut, okay, who are sensitive, who have, what he said is, whose skin is burned, meaning it's sensitive, meaning it's vulnerable. Okay, we're talking about transformation, we're talking about changing theater schools. Again, or do we have time for questions? Okay, go ahead and shoot. Let us... Marta Miłoszewska. I'm the Dean of Stage Directing at the Academy here. I'm one of the organizers of this conference, and to answer your question, we're about to face a test. We completed the Change Now program, a 3-year program, and our terms are also expiring shortly. Rector Malajkat and the remaining rectors and deans, rectors, and this will be a time to verify. And new people will be elected, appointed, will find out what we learned, what we're ready, because this election is also important in terms of what happens in the future. It's an important point, it's a turning point, and I think it's worth mentioning. Yes, there's a difficult choice or election ahead of us. I think we saw somebody in the back and somebody there, and my name's Adrianna Malecka. I'm a graduate of the school. I'll be speaking at the conference tomorrow, but about intimacy coordinating. This is an important panel for me as a graduate of the school, actually 2 schools, because I also studied at the film school. I was kicked out from the acting department following the selection process. I also had a lot of conversations with students and graduates of other schools, including Krakow, and I have a lot of ideas after your conversation. Thank you very much. I'm glad this is all happening. Thanks to the rector for everything he's doing. Thanks to the entire team who's working on changing this school. Nonetheless, I feel that our school is doing a lot, but other schools aren't really doing what they could, aren't doing things that might set an example. There was a lot of general remarks, but I have more specific, in-your-face or direct questions on what the rector of the Łódź Film School said about the clear-cut distinctions on us not... You said that you don't imagine asking a master. You can't imagine asking a maestro. I don't want to misquote you, but okay, but that's exactly why we have what's happening now, lack of a contract. And this is something that's really needed, because if you have a maestro, if you have an artist, a virtuoso, that doesn't make them a good teacher, and that's something that they ought to ensure. So directors or anybody who's employing actors to teach or people to teach, so these are actually key questions that they ought to be asking. And here, let me just look at my notes. And about expulsion, no, wrong word. In Krakow, I know firsthand, I mean, I know these people, the people in question. You said that even if student evaluations or performance reviews, even if you get somebody overstepping the line, they are dismissed. They are dismissed dismiss teachers. Sometimes it's hurtful because it can work both ways. The point is to bring it out into the open because it's another point of view. Again, I know what you're referring to. I won't name names, but a student or students anonymously in a performance review to write something about a teacher, and then they're relieved of their duties. That's a bad process that you have in Krakow, because there's no inquiry. At least I think that there's no attempt to talk it over with the persons in question, with the persons concerned. No microphone, no translation. I said it often happens. I'm not saying it often happens. I think you're relying on second-hand information. This is something that I'm dealing with on a first-hand basis. I've had a conversation like that yesterday, and I can assure you that it never happens. Even though, personally, it's the way I am. Nobody's ever dismissed without recourse. We don't throw them out with the bathwater. So what are the procedures? Okay, if something comes to... Okay, I won't get into details, but let me tell you a story. Person X approached me, came up to me, saying that in the community they're being treated badly by person Y, another student. Student X is badly treated by student Y. And then it turned out that student the person was involved in a sexual abuse case. So now it's no longer my procedure, but I always discuss it with both parties. And trust me, believe me, when I tell you, I ask around, I do my fact-finding, I do my research. Maybe that's the way. Maybe I don't have a problem talking with difficult people. Like I said, I grew up in a rough environment, but I want to find the context I want to understand the context, the background behind this conflict. And talking about your past, that's also something, and I'm sure this moral hangover. So again, it's a question of upbringing, and I know this firsthand as a former student of the Łódź Film School. It's something I experienced. I even didn't feel... I realized that, a loved one might die, and I would need to be acting on stage. But fortunately, I got kicked out and I never graduated. But I realized I kind of was getting myself that this would be required of me. But now a specific question on the system. In school, when talking to my younger colleagues, teachers, for instance, who were dismissed, fired from the Warsaw Film School, go on to teach in other schools, they're transferred. And this is something that happens on a regular basis. So is that verified? Do you do background checks? If somebody was, for instance, dismissed from a theater school because of being abusive, verbally or physically, do you do background checks? In Kraków, you have that in Kraków and Łódź as well. There are. That's very difficult, because if you have, it's not in the records if they left by mutual consent, but sometimes something comes to our attention, and the teacher, the lecturer was examined and they are no longer employed by the film school. I have a request. If anyone, if you or anyone else in the academic community or outside, or somebody or a graduate, if you are aware of any information, if you are in possession of anything that would, of any information about someone, then I do encourage you to come to me and talk about specifics. Of course, this is not the place to do so, this conference, but to respond to your questions. But please feel free to approach me. So, do we do background checks? No. If we're choosing to hire a teacher, a lecturer, we look at their personal qualifications, their CV, their track record, but we don't proactively, neither myself nor my colleagues check or call or ask around in other schools what their performance was like in this respect, whether they have any asking around about someone, that we do that when there is a justified, when there are any doubts as to the lecturer in question. So we look at the way they work with our students. We respond to every information, we respond to everything we're told by students, and we also, because we know from experience that these complaints this information won't come up on its own. We try and keep tabs on the situation, and any decision on further employment aren't based entirely on feedback, on information. It's a difficult process, but it's more complex. There always has to be there is something like monitored or cooperation, employment with kind of oversight. Sometimes we have teachers, if teacher flat out denies all allegations, or if they don't claim, but if teachers express their willingness or are ready to admit that even if they don't understand the allegations, even if they don't know where the accusations are coming from, but they will think it over, and they will, attend a workshop, some sort of course, if they go off on training or some sort of counseling. If there's a readiness there, and if no glaring abuse or violation had occurred, and if it's only if the doubts pertain to their method, the way the teacher works, then this decision, again, in light of what we said, about it being a process, about certain habits, certain established standards, norms, and we can't really be too rash. However, If there's something that has slipped, or if we haven't noticed, then myself or the plenipotentiary, there's a confidential procedure, or other persons in the school, the dean, will be grateful to you for letting us know, will be grateful for anything that leads to improving the situation. Okay. On these lecturers who are transferred, these like itinerant lecturers who are moved from school to school, I don't know if I can answer the question because we need to name names. So, okay, maybe we can talk about this in private. I'm not responsible for recruitment or termination, but if I knew that anyone, a teacher or a manager, or anyone in management was any infringement, then I would have responded. I don't know exactly who you mean, but I'll be glad to get back to that. Fortunately, nobody asked me. Actually, for once at least, the question was not addressed to me. Ula Kijak, thank you very much for mentioning representation. I think that's a conversation we have ahead of us. Data, thank you very much for expanding the context. The question, who can perform, who can represent whom, and the performing an experience that's not your own, that's a process that's still ahead of us, but I want to change the subject a little bit and get back to what you said about this state of affairs, what education in art schools was like, and did you introduce, or are you considering introducing any changes to the curriculum in the wake of the findings of the report that you discussed? Obviously, the examples I'll be giving, this won't address all the problems, but it's something that's been gnawing at me. So if the report says that there's fatigue, exhaustion, overwork, and in a condition like that, it's difficult for us to respect our boundaries, and it's easier to overstep somebody else's boundaries. So for my part, and here I'm relying on experience, for some years now, I've been running workshops for students and actors on boundaries, on how to avoid and identify manipulation and abuse of behavior by stage directors with respect to performers. And people often complain or tell me that nobody had taught us this in school, that nobody in school said we were entitled to a break, to rest, to our well-being. And they tell us that they weren't given the psychological skills. Maybe it's not. It should be taught at a workshop. So some sort of how to look after your physical resources, your emotional resources, your intellectual resources. Maybe that's something. It's like teaching athletes nutrition, how to perform in sports, how to, So, are you thinking of changing the curriculum to take that into account in some way? And another question, in the curriculum, are there any changes? Are you thinking of recognizing, analyzing, and your own artistic development? So what works for you and how you can build your career, your development, you develop artistically. It's like what Agata mentioned, what happens at the theater, but it's a clear professional skill, which we don't have as a profession, as a community. And any other changes to the curriculum that you're thinking of introducing? Tak.
Oh boy. As for changing the programs to allow more space and time for rest, I assure you that our school does everything we can to react to such suggestions, and there have been some suggestions to that effect. But there are a number of contradictory interests to this problem. So these requests for a break that is so obvious to us that it's hard to react, but also the expectation that we provide as many tools, as many workshops, as many subjects are also so strong that we simply have to find the golden mean to provide for both types of needs. I won't go into details because that's going to be too specific, and I'm sure my colleagues will. As for education itself, as for the teaching itself, that's something to be done over many, many years. At every school, I believe, both the approach of staff, of teaching staff, to how they are to work amongst themselves, how they are to evaluate themselves, whether they need a supervisor of some kind. Yes, that's definitely something that we are talking about, but it's not something that we have fully completed. Yes, we do this within international programs. We do just that. The problem is that we have a limited number of places and limited student time. I would like all of you to take part in this, but there's also the program, the curriculum, which we need to complete, which is a challenge. But I do that in my workshops. Maybe I didn't say exactly, formulate it precisely. I was thinking of the ability to care for oneself within the artistic process, especially for actors. For instance, it's been said that, say, somebody is playing a violence victim, a victim of rape, they might need some psychological support. Thankfully, people are already saying that if you are acting in a role of the perpetrator, that also may require psychological assistance. Are there any tools within the curriculum? If not tools, then advice as to how people should take care of themselves so they don't suffer harm or cause harm to others. Microphone, please. Microphone, please. At the Theatre Academy, we have just had a series of workshops, including on intimate work, which included areas of that kind. These are very dynamic workshops, which makes me very happy. They have a life of their own. We touch on various problems of current interest. But to me, in my view, it's still at an early embryonic stage. Nonetheless, even though Kasia's shaking her head, yes, but I have to, because we work with intimacy coordinators, on which more tomorrow, and you all have those trainings. Both students, I don't know about students, but the staff do, that the whole staff has been trained. Well, indeed, maybe I'll reply with an anecdote, but I think this is a good illustration of the problem. Overwhelm, exhaustion, fatigue, a huge program to go through. This is true both of acting students, but also of other fields of study. And I tried to go the administrative way. I tried to force fellow lecturers to not have classes on Saturdays and Sundays. The weekend is for resting. Today, that is enforced, but everybody's just sort of working underground. Students and staff do meet on Saturdays or Sundays, and if I ever hear about this, I'm told, oh, we just dropped by the school, we're not doing anything. And here, maybe I'm mistaken, I don't believe that the staff are being abusive. I think it's more the students want these extra activities, this extra work. And in other cases, closer to my province, so in film, editing, directing, etc., any attempts to ask them to produce one less film during their studies, that there is resistance. And I understand it, because I myself, when I work, I also push myself to the limit. So it's nothing out of the ordinary for me to pull all-nighters, not because somebody's forcing me, but because I want to. I'm in the flow. Because our work involves exhaustion and pushing yourself, but there's also immense satisfaction. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to try to psychologically lay out this mechanism, but I believe that it's a fact. However, I do agree with you that it's worth talking about this at our schools. Nobody talked to me. This is something that I did to myself. I just went all the way, and after 20 or 30 years, I'm seeing that maybe I should have proceeded with more caution, because it's better if you don't have to learn for yourself what burnout is. So I think it makes sense. However, we're thinking about this at the school. We don't have a precise idea yet of who could lead such workshops. We're looking for a person. It doesn't always work out. I think that this type of curriculum, this addition to the curriculum, by adding this type of content, I think it's important. But I also believe that we need to be co-responsible, responsible for each other on our teams, because if ever we run into violence, the most recent complaints are concerned with inter-student relationships. So that also requires some reaction, or introducing a conversation on that subject in the curriculum. I got the mic, so I'm guessing I can ask the next question. Hanna Raszewska-Kursa, a short question. I saw some pro-inclusive solutions among anarchist communities, where various recruitment ads say that you should give your name, surname, data, whatever, and your preferred pronouns. It's not a question about one's sexual identity, it's about your pronouns. So my question for you is, do you believe that introducing that sort of thing in the admissions or casting announcements might work? Letting people know that you are welcome, whatever pronouns you use. and yet without sort of prying into somebody's intimate identity. I don't see any counterindications. Of course, we don't want to force or push anything. We may have good intentions, but people may see it otherwise, like we're trying to get you to identify. That would be my only concern. Otherwise, I don't see why not. Nor do we. Okay, we've got it covered. Should we wrap up? I'm just curious, is anybody staying to the end of the conference where we'll be talking about these tools? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all of you. This is transformation, so we have important choices ahead of us.